Hey there everyone, and welcome back to Building Games on AWS. In this series, we'll be talking about various security topics as they apply to game development. We'll also touch upon some AWS solutions that can help you mitigate security concerns and harden your security posture. In this episode, we'll be talking about observability on AWS. I'm joined today by Kieran Carraher, who will be discussing today's topic with me.
Hi there, my name is Kieran Carraher and I'm a Specialist Solutions Architect for Security, Identity and Compliance based out of Ireland. I work with customers to enable them to strengthen their security posture on AWS. I generally take on the role of an advisor to help customers navigate through matters of security on the AWS platform. But I also enjoy content creation and bringing the voice of security to conversations in AWS.
Thank you for joining us today, Kieran. Now, to get us started, I was wondering if you could talk about what observability really means.
So observability is a lot like the Dark Angels in Warhammer 40k. It's a really out there reference. If anyone gets it, hopefully you get this reference. And what I mean by that is that it's easily confused for something else. And that something being monitoring and not the ruinous powers of chaos. What observability is the ability to determine the internal state of a system by looking at its external outputs. This is something we can only do with effective monitoring, and the two complement each other. This is why the two are easily mixed together into the conversation on logging and monitoring.
Well, hopefully it isn't quite as scary for our customers. So, now that we've hit on that, why is observability so important?
So a good way to understand the importance of observability will be to understand the demand it addresses. And I'm going to use monitoring to help me here. So with monitoring, what are we doing? We're collecting data, building dashboards, setting thresholds and alerts based off data we're collecting. These thresholds and alerts are events which we can foresee happening and want to take action against. And they likely come from things like forecasting needs of services over time and growth, or risk assessments where we look at what if scenarios and mitigate against them. The key takeaway here is that with monitoring, we are working with what we project or expect to potentially occur. Now, foresight is a great thing, but there's always something unexpected that happens, especially in larger and more complex systems. No one thought that Wheatley was going to shove GLaDOS into a potato, but he did it, and had GLaDOS foreseen it, then she would have planned for it. When we're thinking about the unexpected, monitoring alone won't be sufficient in order for us to determine the root cause of a problem. In steps observability. The aim here is to use the data that we collect, data reflecting the external outputs of a system, to build a picture of what is actually happening internally to said system. With this picture, we not only get a better understanding of the current state of a system, but we can more rapidly detect unwanted or adverse behavior, thus enabling us to take appropriate mitigating action.
That sounds like a well-rounded picture of what our customers should think about with observability. So, with that in mind, I was wondering, what stages of the development lifecycle should our customers think about observability?
Observability needs to be present no matter where you are in the lifecycle of a project. It's something that you should be doing the entire way through a project and at many different levels, such as networking, OS, or a game itself. Let's use the AWS config service as a nice example of observability living in the DevOps and LiveOps worlds. When you're going down that initial development path of a game, you're likely to be using AWS config to deploy rules that ensure that certain best practices are adhered to, such as ensuring that no S3 bucket is mistakenly made public, that API gateway endpoints have a WAF associated with them, or that only approved AMIs are used to the presence of tags. Rules such as these help to minimize risk during development and avoid that nightmare at 2 a.m. You know the one. You're in a room full of people and your S3 bucket's open to the world. Now, let's look at config in LiveOps. Your game is deployed out in the wild and loved by thousands of players. You want to ensure that nothing happens which could have a negative impact on their experience. So you may have AWS config rules which ensure that the right instance type is being used, that your RDS instances are protected from accidental deletion, or that your ACM certificates on your HTTPS endpoints aren't about to expire. The rules within AWS config enable us to establish checks and even auto remediation for a wide range of predetermined or common actions. These are the AWS managed rules within AWS config. However, you can also create your own custom rules and deploy them for your own bespoke scenarios. Now, this is starting to sound a bit like monitoring with triggers for auto remediation, and you wouldn't be wrong in thinking so. Where AWS config really shows its observability is that it keeps a track record of all supported resources from the time of its enablement within the region config is enabled in. This record is not just a list of API events, but a detailed configuration history of the supported resource itself, giving us greater insight into how it was configured, how that configuration has changed over time, and how it has fared against applicable config rules over that time, looking at compliance and non-compliance. Having this kind of in-depth insight into infrastructure helps us see the truer picture with regard to how a resource is being used, how it is handling its task, and how it is being handled by those responsible for it.
Very interesting. Now, to go along with your mention of configuration monitoring to ensure best practices, I was wondering if you could talk about some considerations when setting up assessment of your security posture.
The best bit of advice I can give someone starting off in this area is to understand from the very beginning that no one solution is a fix-all. There are tools out there which fulfill a task, and some fulfill multiple tasks. It's about looking at the underlying need, the why of why you're looking into this area, and addressing that. Take Inspector, for example. It's a service with a variety of features which ultimately enables you to keep your finger on the pulse of your EC2 and container resources in terms of CVEs. A great service, but what if you want to see more than just CVEs on your EC2 and container resources? What if you want to see DNS logs and VPC flow log information? This is where using complementary solutions starts to really fulfill that base need. Let's bring in Security Hub into the mix. By leveraging Security Hub with Inspector, GuardDuty, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, and Config, now we're getting somewhere. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a solution made entirely of AWS services and features. Many AWS services cater for integration with third-party solutions, just like Security Hub. In Security Hub, you can ingest data from a wide variety of third-party solutions, or you can flip that on its head and export your Security Hub findings to an S3 bucket, and then have a third-party solution consume those findings, like a SIEM.
It sounds like our customers have a lot of good possibilities to think about when assessing their security posture. Now, I have one last question while we're here today. We already did a series on analytics. I was wondering if you could talk about the difference between observability and analytics.
As a matter of fact, yes we did, and we'll chuck the link in the description. At a high level, analytics is the analysis of data so that meaningful patterns can be discerned. The power of analytics can be seen in many places, such as driving revenue with a more targeted marketing campaign for a particular demographic, or to better understand when and where more computational power is required for hosting the online portion of a game. Observability, on the other hand, is the collection of data output by a system so that we can determine the status of the internals of said system. The more observable your system is, the more you can potentially get out of analytics in said system. The two should always complement each other. A relatable way to look at it is this. Through analytics, I know that my European player base sees a jump in logins around 6 p.m. Irish time. So if I want to run a game or an event in the game in Europe, I should do it around this time or a little later in order to maximize participation. However, through observability, I know that around this same time, latency in the busier areas within my game spikes for European players because the infrastructure cannot handle the initial spike and it takes time for it to scale. With observability and analytics, I can maximize European player participation in an event and ensure that the infrastructure is ready for the sudden influx of players.
These sound like very good considerations for our customers to keep in mind when building their games on AWS. Thank you again for joining us today, Kieran. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and hope to see you all again soon. Bye.